Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji. Welcome back to the Deconstructed Woman podcast. Today we have Melissa Pagodas from Melissa Pagodas Coaching joining us to talk about toxic workplaces. In past episodes, we've touched on different dynamics in the workplace as well as the generational impact that we've experienced, both in Joji and my own experiences as well as other people's and what we've kind of heard through the grapevine. And so we wanted to bring Melissa on today to kind of talk about what is toxic workplace, kind of what's the definition, and then really, how do we maneuver around this? I think that it's a situation that probably has touched most people in a lot of different ways because, there's always going to be different dynamics in the workplace. And so, Melissa, I wanted you to have an opportunity to kind of talk about what you do, and then we'll kind of get into some of the questions that we prepared and talked about a little bit before. But if you could kind of let our listeners know kind of what kind of got you into this and what you do now with your coaching business, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. Yes. Happy to do so. And thanks for having me. My name is Melissa Pagonis. I have been coaching now for about 5 years. My background is in learning in development, and I do a lot of life and leadership coaching, executive coaching in my role, as well as learning and development. But I got into coaching about 6 years ago because, quite honestly, I reached out to a life coach because I was dealing with a toxic work environment and I was not sure at all how to navigate it. Um, and so it was such a great experience. I learned so much about myself and other people that I actually went back and became a life coach. So wanted to pay it forward. So I love working with anyone who's dealing with toxic work environments. In my practice, I primarily focus working with women.
Well, that works out really well, Melissa, because this whole podcast is sort of dedicated to women and deconstructing sort of the female experience and how all the different things that influence us, shows up in our lives in different ways. And so I think it's a perfect conversation in terms of as a topic for this podcast. And so, can you tell us when we talk about toxic work environments, what does that look like? Or how did you know you were experiencing or you were enmeshed in a toxic work environment? What gave you that evidence?
I think it's a really good question. So it's such a broad definition, right? There's a lot of terms for toxic work environment, hostile work environment, workplace bully. There's so many words for it to describe it, and there's a variety or a large range of behaviors that constitute potentially a toxic work environment. So it can range from, mild, non-deviant behaviors, like something as simple as eye rolling, gossip, um, you know, indirect behaviors like, not saying good morning to someone. And right, those could be intentional, could maybe not be intentional. So just mild behaviors, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is like extreme, violent, harmful behaviors. But generally, when we talk about toxic work environments, it's typically any behavior that you see from an employee or a group of individuals that, ultimately has like a negative consequence on someone, an employee, a group of employees, or the organization itself.
And so, when you say a group of people, is that where they're sort of in collusion with each other against a single person or against a certain subset of the work environment? How does it differ in terms of the impact versus one person versus the group? Could they be the same impact or more people, it makes a worse situation?
I think it could be that, right? It could be multiple things, right? But generally, it's any act that, threatens the likelihood or the credibility, or I should say the livelihood or the credibility of an individual, right? So the way it typically presents is, you know, someone who feels bullied or part of a toxic work environment, they invariably always say, every Sunday night, I get this really dreadful feeling about going into the office and it just drains me. Um, it affects their mental health, their physical health in some ways. And it's repetitive, right? It's not just a like once in a blue moon, like, oh, someone rolled their eyes at me, or someone made a comment or gave me feedback I wasn't, asking for or receptive to receiving. It's really repeated behavior that is intentional and it happens at least twice a week, um, maybe more, and it's ongoing. So, like 6 months or more, right? It's chronic and it really starts to impede that person's ability to be productive, to really show up, um, you know, at, 100%. They might start seeing their confidence erode, um, their self esteem going down. People are less likely to share ideas. It's just toxic. And when it's toxic, right? It's just not a place you want to go, a place you want to be because you don't feel supported, you don't feel backed up. Uh, Maybe trust is eroding. Um, a- and it's painful. And a lot of people experience it, right? Even in my day to day, just when people ask me what I do, there's always everyone always goes, oh, I had a boss one time, or oh, I had a coworker. It was so toxic, it was awful. Like everyone can relate to this because unfortunately, at some point, it's very likely that people are going to come across these situations or these types of environments.
And I think that, I mean, that's a great kind of definition and then carrying into like what that looks like for individuals kind of listening in. I think I'm such like a problem solver that I'm jumping to like, okay, what do we do with that? Because I think that, like we're looking at the situation. I'm even like you were saying, I'm thinking about my own work environment, my own past experiences. And I guess there's multiple roles, obviously. Like there's the person who is kind of the target, if you will. And then there's people around that person who are maybe observing this, trying to intervene, but also trying not to become part of the dynamic that is going on. And so I guess we could maybe talk about that. And then there's obviously like the person, whether they have awareness or not, on the person creating that environment or, kind of the source of it. And so, how do you kind of identify, like, I mean, I assume like somebody comes to you and they say, okay, I'm in a toxic work environment, I'm the target. Um, or do you typically get people who are saying, I'm observing this and I don't know what to do? Because I think there's probably, I'm assuming different approaches to who is speaking.
Absolutely. So, what you're referring to is the bystanders, right? So, I call it there's the person in the crosshairs who's sort of the target of the bullying behavior, right? And then there's people that are bystanders. And typically, what bystanders do is they just fly below the radar, right? They don't want to have that, the crosshairs on them. They don't want to be the target of a bully's behaviors, if you will. So they'll typically fly below the radar, but they too will also learn, right? Because it goes back to workplace culture, which we can talk about too. But if an organization is not addressing toxic work environments or bullying type behaviors, then eventually it works its way into its culture and it becomes the norm, especially if leaders are the ones who are engaging in sort of this toxic behavior. So typically you'll see bystanders who just kind of fly under the radar. What's happening there is they're also not comfortable to speak up and challenge and put their ideas out there because they don't want to be the recipient of uh, the negative consequences or the toxic behavior. So I genuinely don't work with bystanders. Usually, people that come to me are dealing with, a toxic environment and they're the target of it, or they're feeling extremely affected by it.
And I would say that there's another role, and that's probably the role that I most identify with, which is the that I'm the manager or the director that's responsible for a group of people. And I know that there is this, you know, I almost feel like it's a being, it's the elephant in the living room kind of there's just a presence here and you can feel the negativity and people who don't want to come to work or whatever. And as the leader, I feel so responsible to change this pattern, but I also don't know where to start. There's so much history, and there's so much accepted behavior that has been justified over the years and you don't know how do you break this pattern, and you have to create buy-in from the executive team or the owners to say, do we all agree that this is a problem, and how far are you willing to go to dismantle this and start again? And I think that in itself, as a leader, takes time to put those pieces in place so that you can have a plan that's going to be executable. Because at any point in the process, somebody higher than you can sort of, pull the rug out from under you and inadvertently enable this bad behavior. And then that sort of cripples your whole plan. And so there is sort of this tactical sort of approach that I have been involved with, which is creating consensus and buy-in from those above me to say, okay, do we agree that this behavior is unacceptable? Now, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to? And of course, with HR law, then you also have to have progressive discipline. You have to have, all the things, all the boxes checked so that you're not opening yourself up to, discrimination, which is gender, age, ADA, all the things that could be brought up. And so as a leader, you've got all these opposing factors that you're trying to do at the same time. The intention is good, but it also looks like to the target or the bystander that this is just taking a really long time. And then they lose faith in the process. And then, sometimes then sides are chosen, right? And then you get more entrenched behavior. So it really is quite a complex environment, and trying to, believing that you're going to be able to change this overnight. I mean, I had to really level set expectations with my teams at my workplaces to say, this takes time if we want this to be a sustained change. It's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight if it's going to be something that's really going to be valuable and is going to last. And so, how do you what I would imagine is that I know a lot of people who would probably come to you that are in my position to just say, like, I don't even know where to start. It's like, this animal is bigger than I know how to handle. And where do you begin? I mean, how would you respond to that? Where would I begin as a leader?
So coming at it from also working with leaders who are trying to resolve, negative behavior and toxicity in the workplace.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think it always goes back to, and even when I work with individuals who are the target or, in the crosshairs, one of the very first things I try to understand is about the company culture. What is the culture like? What are their values? Do they live their values, or are they just kind of like words up on a wall that we refer to, once a quarter or something? Like, are they really living their values? And then also, is there, what's the temperature? What's the environment like for, reporting behavior? Is there a way to report, issues, concerns, ask questions, whistleblow, if you will? Like, is there an avenue for that? If there is, do employees feel comfortable doing that, right? Like, just trying to really gauge, like, what's the temperature of the organization? What's the leadership stance on this? Because you're right. If you don't have leaders who are walking the walk and talking the talk and really leading by example, um, it is so difficult to change this type of culture. But it really goes back to kind of the questions that you were asking is, is this acceptable? What does good look like? What behavior is tolerated? What is not? And how will we handle that? Like, who do we want to be? And how do we want to operate as an organization? And if you don't have that really clear understanding of values and guiding principles, it really is an uphill battle, right? And so it it could be this huge org change initiative, right, where you're trying to shift culture. And what ends up happening is as you're transitioning and working through a culture change, it kind of shakes people out. Like some people just naturally like leave because things are changing and it's not the same, right? And then you're kind of left with you know um, the people that align with the new way of thinking and the new way of doing things. I guess the question back to you would be, in your specific scenario, where do you fall in that spectrum? Do you have a strong, philosophy or strong values? Like, what's the temperature of the organization in that sense?
Different workplaces that I've been exposed to and where I've had leadership roles. And I
Hmm.
work for large companies that have very well written, market speak on mission, vision, values. And then I am also exposed to small companies where the brand is really the owners of the company and their work, how the community experiences them. And in both levels and sizes of organizations, you can have people who there's an unspoken value which is really adhered to versus a really well written something that's on a board somewhere on a plaque
Hmm.
somewhere. Nobody knows what that means.
Yep.
And so I've worked in both environments. And I think that in the one that I'm referencing most, we don't have a written values or mission or vision. We have an agreement about what was the founding owners, really developing and what was their goal in the community and really trying to create the legacy of those people. And so I do think, but there isn't anything. But I also believe that I don't know if putting it on the wall without having the courage to fight for it is also worthwhile. I think my approach was really to help people understand that this goes against the nature of what we're trying to accomplish here. If you work in healthcare and we're not serving the community or we don't have, and you can't, there's a lot of research that says you can't serve patients if you're not being treated well.
Right.
And so there's that whole thing about, how do we as coworkers treat each other? And if we don't feel safe in our environment, then we can't create a quality experience for our patients. And so there's sort of that, that dual kind of relationship where you have to, so as a manager, as a director, I have to take care of my staff who then have the ability to take care for our patients. And so that's where I think it gets to the point of managing all these different priorities in a situation because we know that employees that don't feel safe are not going to be able to care for whomever their customer is, whether that's a patient or a client or something like that. One of the
Mhm.
interesting things I was thinking about too, if you don't mind, is that when we did the queen bee conversation, I did have a friend of mine reach out, and she was just talking about her daughter who was in a situation where from reading between the lines, if maybe her daughter was in a situation where she was being the victim or targeted. So, sort of building on Alyssa's question, if what is the different kind of goals or things that you work on with somebody who is caught in the middle and who is getting a lot of negative feedback or, is in the crosshairs, as you said, like what is it that you work with them on to give our listeners a little bit of a taste of what would that work look like? And so I think that would help them identify if that's something they need to work on and, and reach out for some coaching.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things we work on is this concept of you teach people how to treat you. right? So sometimes when you're in a toxic work environment and you're just trying to navigate it, right? Some people don't have the ability to make a change or, leave the job or just up and quit, right? Like they really need tools for how do I navigate this situation. And so we work a lot on the concept of boundaries. And you really can't establish boundaries until you have a clear understanding of who you are and what your values are, right? It kind of goes back to culture, like organizational culture. Like if you don't have an understanding of values and what your rules of engagement are, then you're a prime target for a workplace bully, right? Potentially. So we do a lot of, boundaries and, what is tolerated and what is not. Navigating situations, taking your power back when you feel like a bully has taken your power away. Like, how do you get that power back, and how do you do that tactfully and professionally? Concepts around that, I would say, mostly is really about teaching people how to treat you, and then also establishing boundaries and understanding your values. It's where we mostly start and stay. And that's real work, right? That's hard work because a lot of times people tend to clam up and go into a victim role. Because it feels like it's very much something that's being done to you. There are techniques and you can teach people how to treat you. And sometimes it makes the situation worse, but um, in my experience, like it always, it always gets better after you speak up. There's lots of different variables there, but I think it's also important to point out that, when you think about a bully, I mean, I'll pose this as a question, they present themselves as, powerful and in control and confident, but, you know, what's your perception of that? Do you really think they feel that way?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's so much education about the fact that the bully is somebody who is really posturing, right? I mean, they're faking it until they make it kind of a thing. If they can get away with it, then they will. And they're testing the waters, especially with any new blood in the
Yeah.
water. My question is that when you are coaching somebody who has been targeted, how do you approach the structures within HR to file a complaint, potentially understand and navigate, whistleblowing or filing a complaint, reaching out to the advocacy structures in place, whether within the organization or externally to the organization, that can support an individual who is in that role. Like, how often when at your point of coaching, do you escalate that to a point where they need to seek some support externally? I don't mean from the coach, but like the HR processes within a company or, organizations that can help them figure out if they should file a complaint with, like, say, Illinois Human Rights or the other organizations like that, EEOC or things like that.
So a lot of times people are fearful to go to HR. Right. So in toxic work environments, there's a lack of trust. There's fear of retaliation. There's intimidation. A lot of times, workplace bullies, have painted this picture to leadership, like so their managers and above that they are like the best thing since sliced bread. Right. And so they have this really good reputation up at the top. And it's very difficult for people. Um, to make that decision to pull in HR or to escalate or to, make a report through their whistleblower, line, right? It really is driven by the particular situation and their level of comfort. But if someone is wanting to reach out and comfortable and working with HR, um, I know that HR kind of gets this reputation of like HR is for the company, but that's not always the case, right? Again, going back to like culture and whatnot, like that's not always the case. Like HR is there to help you. Um, they're there to help you navigate these situations. And every time. somebody, r- I'm every time I've coached someone, whenever they reach out to HR or escalate it to their manager or whatnot, 9 times out of 10, I'd say it's not the first time they're hearing of this, right? They're aware of this. They're already onto it. There's been other complaints. There's been other situations that have arisen. And so I think it's very easy to feel like you're very isolated and you're alone and this is only happening to you. But if you're in the crosshairs, chances are someone else is also in the crosshairs and is feeling similar or has been in the crosshairs by this particular individual or group. Um, and so it's just having the courage and the level of comfort to escalate it and to actually go through with that, right? And that 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 is just 100% comfort level and depends on the situation that the person is in. It's always driven by the person I'm coaching. So I would never encourage them to go to HR if they weren't comfortable, right? They're kind of driving the next step, and we're just coaching and navigating that together and looking at resources and whatnot.
Yeah, because I think that I also wear the hat of HR in my role. And so it's a difficult position to be in because you as a HR person are a resource for the employee. Of course, we're always afraid that there is a whistleblower and somebody's not going to come talk to us and then they're going to go to, an outside organization before they let us have the opportunity to fix what we can internally. And I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that, when an employee comes to talk to me, I've already heard this from some other people, but very few people want to document it. And until it's documented, it's not real. And so that's the thing about it is like you have to encourage the employee to take the risk to be able to trust us, to be able to create a record of it so that it's substantiated and we can create a plan around it. Because otherwise, there's really nothing we can do, and we're bound by confidentiality. And so we don't want to um, say anything that's going to create even a more uncomfortable situation because that's not our role. But at the same time, our hands are tied without having any documentation. And so, on one hand, I do encourage people, I want people to come to me and before it's festered so much that it's a really volatile situation or they're ready to quit. It's like there's lots of steps before that. And I feel like people wait until they can't tolerate it anymore. And that creates a really difficult situation because now their stress level's really high. They're extremely like they're done. But at the same time, we're just being brought into it, after it's been going on and stewing for a long time. And so then to be able to slow it down and say, well, I need some time to work on this. I need to, are you going to document it? What are your issues? Can we create, can we do some arbitration? Can we do some work together? And of course, you have to get somebody comfortable. So I think the fact that there are coaches like you that are available to folks like me to be able to work with individuals to get ready to be able to prep them to whether they decide to document or to know that there's support out there to do that, which does give them confidentiality. And I do think that it's another great resource for me as well, because people have said to me, you are HR, you're the director of this company, you do everything, but it would be nice to have a couple layers between, you know, the managers report to you but yet we need to come to you and that it feels very there's just there's very little buffer there. And so I definitely understand it, but we're not a large enough company also to have layers and layers of hierarchy. So, we're all sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place. And so it's, well, how do we solve for this? And it's really nice to know that there are coaches out there like you that we could lean on to say, hey, how do we do this so that my staff person has the ability to have private conversation and can decide how they want to proceed. And I do
Mhm.
think that even if they choose not to take any action, they still have a release and some support that allows them to feel comfortable, whether that allows them to come back to work and continue working for the same company, or they decide to separate. I
Mhm.
always tell my employees, you have to do what's best for you and your family. Like this company, every company continues to churn and burn, whether you're here or not. And so, therefore, you have to do some coping mechanisms and you got to take care of yourself. I hate to lose good staff, but I also don't want to have a reputation where, we're just creating bad environments for people. And so it is really an important thing, I think, to know that there is this field out there that can help support. And are there, can you share a little bit about how people find you or what's the best way to get a hold of you? Or if they're and tell us, like, do you do phone coaching? Do you only do face to face? Do they have to? Because I know that some of our listeners are out of Illinois. And so it would be really helpful to be able to learn how do they access you, and if there are resources in their companies or if there are professional organizations that they could get resources, or how could somebody get help for this from micro level to Melissa all the way through um, maybe public resources that they could access.
Sure, yeah, they can reach out directly to me, just through my email, so melissa.pagonis@gmail.com. Um, and I don't have a website yet, but I'm something I'm working on. But definitely reach out through my email. I do virtual coaching. Everything is virtual, either by phone or by Google Meet or Zoom. So yeah, and I usually typically meet for an hour, 45 minutes, whatever works with the person's schedule.
So, just for everybody's benefit, I'm going to go ahead and spell out the email address. It's melissa.pagonis@gmail.com. It's melissa.pagonis@gmail.com. I want to thank Melissa for taking the time to talk to us about this very important topic. And it wasn't until we started talking about it that I realized how important and how complex it is for everybody that's involved in the different roles in a toxic work environment, whether you're the target, whether you're a bystander, whether you're a manager just trying to figure out how to manage this and create a better work environment and ultimately create a better quality experience for all the stakeholders in the environment. So I really appreciate the time, Melissa, and the listeners. Please know you can always contact Melissa directly. You can email us at the deconstructedwoman@gmail.com. You can leave us a voicemail on Spotify or podcasters. And we look forward to hearing from you and continuing other great conversations like this one with Melissa. I want to thank Melissa again for her time and energy. And we really appreciate your expertise in this very sensitive topic.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.